The RA will now consider proposed SMA bylaw amendments. SMA bylaws were last amended in 2016, and since then, several housekeeping amendments and alignment amendments that have resulted from the transition to the Medical Staff Association have been initiated. And at the 2022 Fall Representative Assembly, delegates approved recommendations of the Special Committee on SMA Governance that require amendments. Today, at the SMA RA, we will again consider amendments to the SMA bylaws. So I'd now like to introduce to the stage Drs. Jay Kalra and Susan Hayton, as well as SMA Legal Counsel Roché McKeag to the stage, please.
Hello. As noted, my name is Roché McKeag. I am the in-house legal counsel for the SMA. And since I began working for the SMA in July of 2022, I have been working on these amendments to the bylaws. So this is my baby. Also joining me on stage are two of your RA delegates who are also members of the Legislation and Policy Committee, which is the committee that undertook the work of turning all of your recommendations that came from the Fall 2022 RA into the draft amendments that were circulated for your review and were found in the RA workroom. So, as a bit of background, the SMA bylaws were last amended in 2016. And since then, there have been several housekeeping and sort of alignment amendments that have been identified, as well as the creation of the SHA required that we made some changes at the SMA to bring consistency with the new areas and networks of the SHA. So at the 2021 Spring RA, you passed several resolutions about reconfiguring and transitioning to the new medical staff associations, which have now been in place for a while. And so now we have amendments to the bylaws that are required for that, because the bylaws refer still to the regional medical associations, which no longer exist. As well, in 2021, the Fall RA approved the establishment of the Special Committee on SMA Governance, that had 5 elected members from the Representative Assembly and had consultants in Dr. Brian Sharfstein and Emmanuel Morin who assisted their work. So at the last RA, as I mentioned before, the Special Committee on SMA Governance made some recommendations to the Fall RA, and the RA passed a suite of resolutions respecting the amendments to the SMA bylaws. So the newly reconstituted Legislation and Policy Committee translated those resolutions into proposed bylaw amendments. The bylaw amendments have been reviewed by the board of the SMA, and the board referred them to the RA. And the RA is now being asked to review these amendments and refer them to the AGM tomorrow, where we will ask the membership to vote on these bylaw amendments, and they will only be adopted if they are approved by a 3/4 of the voting population vote. So I hope everybody really loves these bylaws. So in your RA workroom, there is a side-by-side document of the bylaws. The first column has the current SMA bylaw. The second column has the revised proposed amendments to the SMA bylaws, and the changes are marked in red font on those. And then the third column, where we thought some sort of explanation or additional information made sense, that you will find that additional information there. So for the purposes of this presentation, we're not going to go through the amendments line by line. I'm just going to give you a general overview of the changes that are being made. If you have any questions at any time, I will try to remember to look at the microphones, and you can come up, and Dr. Kalra and Dr. Hayton and I will be happy to answer your questions. So the first set of amendments, as I mentioned, is related to the MSAs. The one is renaming them from RMAs to MSAs, but also the change is being made to require the MSAs to file an annual budget and financial statement with the SMA. It would go to the board, and it would be only for information, not approval, but because the MSAs are a creature of the board for proper governance and oversight, it was felt that that was necessary. The MSA also, in terms of its election procedure, will be required to consider the values of equity, diversity, and inclusion in electing its delegates, and you will find this throughout the bylaw revisions with paying attention to the EDI values, and that comes in part from our collaboration with the EDI committee, as Dr. Debuka mentioned in his presentation. There's also an amended representation by population formula, and that means that for the larger groups, for the larger MSAs, instead of only having 15 delegates for more than 500 members, now you will have 15 delegates for 500 to 600, and then 16 delegates for 601 to 750, 17 for 751 to 1,000, and then 18 for 1,000 plus members. And that's just to more accurately represent on the RA the number of members who are being represented by the delegates. For sections, similar to the MSAs, there will be asked in these amendments to file an annual budget and financial statement with the SMA board for information. And there is also an amended representation by population formula for sections. Previously, it was 1 delegate per section, as long as they'd had 10 or more members. And now it will be 1 delegate for 11 to 100 members, 2 delegates for 101 to 499, and then 3 for 500 and over. So again, that is to more accurately represent the number of members who are being represented by the delegates from those subdivisions. Another exciting change is a change to the nominating committee. So the proposed change is to have a nomination and appointments committee. This would be changed from being only elected from the RA, and it would be a group that had 3 members elected by and from the RA who are not on the board, as well as 2 members who are appointed by the board who are not on the RA or the board. So the reason for putting those restrictions on there is that part of the role of the nomination and appointment committee would be to hopefully nominate, fresh meat, new blood. And so it's difficult when you're all in the same groups to know people outside. So that's why we thought this would create a greater diversity of people to bring into the RA and into the various committees for which appointments are made. And the immediate past president would be the non-voting chair, and that is effectively as it is now. The nomination and appointment committee would prepare a slate of nominees for election by the RA, which is very similar to what the nominating committee does now. They would also recommend candidates to be appointed by the board, because currently most committee appointments are done directly by the board. And they would also recommend candidates for the various awards. So this is a merger, effectively, of the nominating committee and the appointments and awards committee. So it just means that all of these things will be done by the same group of people, and it will be all done by people elected by the RA and appointed by the board, whereas currently the nominating committee is elected by the RA and the appointments and awards committee is appointed by the board. So it makes it more even, more equal for representation. And here, as well as we saw in the elections for the MSAs, the values of equity, diversity, and inclusion will have to be considered, as well as competence, relevant experience, the distribution of responsibilities within the SMA and the subdivisions, and geographically. More exciting changes to the Finance Committee. It will include the honorary treasurer, 2 members appointed by the board, and 2 members elected by and from the RA who are not on the board. Again, just looking to get a more diverse representation on the Finance Committee, because it's a very exciting committee that everyone wants to be on. So this is the resolution that we are proposing that has been moved and seconded by Dr. Hayton and Dr. Kalra, that these amendments be presented to the spring 2023 RA. The amendments as presented to you be presented to the AGM for their approval. So before we go to that, does anybody have any questions?
Any questions? Any questions that for a committee that uses the metaphors of fresh meat and new blood? And I think only meat when there's a full moon, probably. With no questions, then please get your Slido browsers ready to go for this resolution. Resolution 8, be it resolved that the amendments to the SMA bylaws as presented to the spring 2023 RA be proposed to the annual general meeting on May 6, 2023. So this is not accepting these bylaw changes, this is proposing them to the AGM tomorrow. Moved by Dr. Susan Hayton, seconded by Dr. Jay Kalra. We've already had the opportunity for questions. Would anyone else like to speak to this or ask any questions? No? If so, can we open the voting, please? You have 30 seconds. Voting is closed. And that motion is carried, and the amendments will be presented to the AGM tomorrow.